Michael Harrison froze mid-step on his cabin porch, the split firewood tumbling from his arms as his eyes locked onto something impossible. There, trapped in the collapsed snowdrift by his front door, sat a massive gray wolf with piercing blue eyes, but it wasn't snarling or cowering. The wolf was looking directly at him and slowly, deliberately, bowing its head in what could only be described as a plea for help. Sarah Chen's coffee mug shattered against her kitchen floor 20 miles away as her radio crackled with Michael's shaking voice. "Doc, you need to get out here, now!" The wildlife veterinarian had never heard the stoic ex-soldier sound so rattled. Michael's weathered hands trembled as he stared at the wolf, remembering every nature documentary that warned against direct eye contact with predators. This wolf wasn't following any rules. It maintained steady, almost human-like eye contact, tilting its head as if asking a question. "Stay calm," he whispered to himself, contradicting every instinct screaming at him to retreat inside and lock the door. What kind of wolf begged for help from a human? And why did those intelligent blue eyes seem so desperately familiar? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Michael Harrison had always been a man who preferred the company of mountains to people. At 48, his weathered face told the story of someone who had seen too much of humanity's darker side and chose the solitude of Montana's Glacier Valley as his refuge. The nearest neighbor lived 8 miles down a winding dirt road, and that was exactly how Michael liked it. His log cabin sat on 40 acres of pristine wilderness, 15 miles outside the small town of Whitefish. He had built it himself after his medical discharge from the Army Rangers, using the insurance money from his fallen squad members, money that felt like blood in his hands every time he touched it. The cabin was modest but sturdy, with solar panels gleaming on the roof and a workshop attached where he crafted custom furniture that sold well enough to keep him fed and isolated. Afghanistan had taken everything from him that mattered. His entire squad had been killed in an IED explosion during what should have been a routine patrol. Michael had been 20 feet away, checking a suspicious pile of debris when the world exploded in fire and screaming metal. He spent 3 months in a military hospital, then another year in therapy that never quite reached the guilt eating him alive. Why had he survived when better men with wives and children waiting at home, hadn't? The answer, he'd decided, was that he hadn't survived. Not really. The man who came back from Afghanistan was just a shell going through the motions. So he'd bought this land and disappeared into it, finding a kind of peace in the rhythm of splitting wood, the satisfaction of working with his hands, and the honest silence of the wilderness. His daily routine was sacred. Coffee at dawn, hours in the workshop, crafting tables and chairs from local timber, evenings spent on the porch watching the sun disappear behind the peaks. He fed the birds that came to his feeders, observed the deer that grazed in his meadow, and occasionally hunted for meat with the respect his grandfather had taught him. Take only what you need, waste nothing, honor the animal's sacrifice. Michael had seen wolves before, of course. They were returning to Montana in growing numbers, magnificent creatures that most people either feared or romanticized. He understood they were neither monsters nor fairy tale creatures, just apex predators trying to survive in an increasingly crowded world. He'd watched them from a distance through binoculars, admired their intelligence and family bonds, but always maintained the respectful distance that kept both species safe, which made this moment so impossible to process. In 30 years of living in wild places, he had never seen a wolf behave like this. They were creatures of instinct and survival, not animals that made eye contact with humans and performed what looked disturbingly like a gesture of supplication. Yet here it was, this massive gray wolf with those startling blue eyes, a genetic rarity he knew occurred in less than 1 in 10,000 wolves, sitting in his snowdrift like it was waiting for him to understand something vitally important. Michael's military training kicked in automatically. Assess the threat, identify escape routes, never turn your back on a predator. But every tactical instinct he possessed was being challenged by what he was witnessing. The wolf wasn't displaying any of the warning signs he'd been taught to recognize. No raised hackles, no bared teeth, no tense crouch preparing to spring. Instead, it sat with an almost regal composure, its blue eyes never leaving his face. The November evening was crisp, but not yet brutally cold, the first snowfall of the season having started just hours earlier. The wolf's thick coat was dusted with fresh powder, and Michael could see its breath forming small clouds in the cooling air. What struck him most was the animal's size. This was clearly an alpha male, probably weighing close to 110 pounds, with the broad head and powerful shoulders that marked it as a leader. Yet it made no move to assert dominance or establish territory. "Easy there," Michael said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The wolf's ears twitched at the sound, but it didn't retreat. If anything, it seemed to lean slightly forward, as if trying to understand his words. Michael had seen this behavior before, but not in wild animals. It reminded him of the military working dogs in Afghanistan, the way they would focus intently on their handlers, processing both words and tone. He noticed the scar then, a pale line running from the wolf's left ear down across its cheek to its muzzle. The mark was old but prominent, clearly from a serious injury that had healed months or perhaps years ago. It gave the animal's face a distinguished, almost wise appearance, like a veteran warrior bearing the marks of past battles. Michael took a careful step forward, and the wolf did something that stopped his heart. It lowered its massive head in what could only be described as a bow, not a submission posture, but something more deliberate, more polite. The gesture was so unmistakably intentional that Michael felt a chill run down his spine that had nothing to do with the weather. "What do you want, boy?" he asked, though he immediately felt foolish for speaking to a wild animal as if it were a domestic pet. But the wolf's response was even more unsettling. It stood, shook the snow from its coat, and began walking toward the edge of Michael's property, moving slowly and deliberately. After about 10 steps, it stopped and looked back over its shoulder, those blue eyes meeting Michael's with unmistakable purpose. Every rational part of Michael's brain screamed warnings. Following a wild wolf into the forest as darkness approached was beyond foolish. It was potentially suicidal. But something deeper than logic was at work here, the same instinct that had kept him alive in combat zones, the ability to read situations beyond the obvious facts. This wolf wasn't leading him into danger, it was asking for help. Against every survival rule he'd ever learned, Michael grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight from the porch and began following the wolf. The animal maintained a steady pace, not too fast for a human to follow, but purposeful enough to suggest urgency. It would pause occasionally, ensuring Michael was still behind it, then continue deeper into the forest that bordered his property. They traveled about 200 yards through increasingly thick timber before the wolf stopped beside a massive fallen Douglas fir. The tree had come down recently, probably during the fierce windstorm 2 weeks earlier, and its trunk created a natural shelter beneath its upturned root system. The wolf looked at Michael, then deliberately pawed at a gap in the tangled roots and branches. Michael's flashlight beam penetrated the makeshift den, and what he saw there made him draw in a sharp breath. 2 wolf pups, probably 4 or 5 months old, were huddled together in the protected space. Even from several feet away, he could see that something was terribly wrong. One pup was lying on its side, breathing shallowly, with what appeared to be an infected wound on its hindquarters. The other pup was sitting upright, but was clearly malnourished, its coat dull and its movements weak. The adult wolf, the father, Michael realized, moved to the den entrance and made a soft whining sound. The healthier pup looked up and attempted to crawl toward the sound, but it was obviously too weak to manage more than a few inches. The injured pup didn't respond at all. Michael's mind raced as he processed the situation. These weren't just any wolf pups. They were this magnificent animal's children, and they were dying. The father had somehow understood that humans possess the ability to heal, and despite every instinct telling him to avoid contact with people, he had overcome his fear to seek help. It was an act of desperate love that transcended species boundaries. "Jesus," Michael whispered, playing his flashlight over the tragic scene. The father wolf looked at him with those incredible blue eyes, and Michael could swear he saw hope flickering there. Hope that this strange human would understand and respond to a parent's plea for his children's lives. The next 20 minutes would haunt Michael's dreams for weeks to come, but not for the reasons he expected. As he knelt beside the makeshift den, examining the injured pups with his flashlight, the adult wolf did something that defied every principle of wild animal behavior he'd ever learned. Instead of maintaining a protective distance or showing signs of stress at human proximity to his young, the wolf moved closer, positioning himself where he could observe Michael's actions while remaining close enough to intervene if necessary. "I need to get them to my cabin," Michael said aloud, more to organize his own thoughts than to communicate with the wolf. "That infection looks serious, and they're both severely dehydrated." The injured pup's wound appeared to be several days old, possibly from a trap or a tangle with barbed wire, and the surrounding tissue was inflamed and warm to the touch. The healthy pup was alert but clearly hadn't been eating properly, probably because the father had been spending all his hunting time caring for the injured sibling. When Michael reached toward the injured pup, he expected the father to react defensively. Instead, the wolf moved to the other side of the den and, in a gesture that left Michael speechless, gently nudged the healthy pup toward Michael's outstretched hands. It was unmistakably a gesture of trust. More than that, it was collaboration. "You're asking me to take them," Michael whispered, hardly believing what he was witnessing. The wolf's response was a soft whine and what appeared to be a nod. Michael had seen dogs nod in response to human speech, but never a wild wolf. Yet there was no mistaking the deliberate up-and-down movement of the massive head. Michael carefully lifted the injured pup, noting how the father wolf watched his every movement but showed no aggression. The pup was lighter than it should have been, and its breathing was labored. Time was clearly running short. "Come on," he said to the wolf, cradling the injured pup against his chest. "We're going to help them." The journey back to the cabin was surreal. The adult wolf carried the healthier pup in his mouth, following Michael through the forest with complete trust. When they reached the cabin, Michael expected the wolf to leave the pups at the porch and retreat to a safe distance. Instead, the animal waited while Michael opened the front door, then followed him inside as if this were the most natural thing in the world. Michael quickly cleared a space in his workshop, laying out clean towels and setting up an improvised veterinary station. He had basic first aid supplies and some antibiotics left over from his own injuries, but he knew he was out of his depth. Grabbing his satellite phone, he called the only person in the area who might be able to help. "Dr. Chen?" he said when the call connected. "This is Michael Harrison. I live up in Glacier Valley. I need your help with... This is going to sound crazy, but I have 2 wolf pups here, and one of them is in bad shape." Sarah Chen had been the region's wildlife veterinarian for 15 years, and she'd received plenty of unusual calls, but the urgency in Michael's voice was different. "Wolf pups? Michael, you can't just..." "Doc, please. One of them is going to die if we don't do something soon. And there's something else. The father brought them to me. He's here in my cabin right now, and he's helping." The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. "I'll be there in 45 minutes. Dr. Chen finally said. "Don't do anything except keep them warm and quiet." As Michael tended to the pups, cleaning the wounded one's injury and offering small amounts of water to both, the adult wolf demonstrated behavior that challenged everything he thought he knew about wild animals. When the injured pup whimpered during the cleaning process, the father moved close and began grooming the pup's head with gentle licks, clearly providing comfort. When Michael pointed to the water bowl, the wolf actually pushed it closer to the healthy pup with his nose. Most remarkably, when Michael needed to hold the injured pup still to examine the wound more closely, the wolf seemed to understand and gently but firmly placed a large paw across the pup's hindquarters, keeping it from struggling. It was cooperation at a level that Michael had only seen between humans and domestic animals, never between a human and a wild predator. "What are you?" Michael asked softly, looking into those extraordinary blue eyes. The wolf tilted his head, and for a moment Michael could have sworn he saw not just intelligence but understanding reflected there. This wasn't just a wild animal operating on instinct. This was a thinking, reasoning creature who had made a conscious decision to trust a human with the most precious things in his world. While they waited for Dr. Chen, Michael found himself talking to the wolf as if it were a person. He explained what he was doing as he cleaned the wound, described the antibiotics he was preparing to administer, and even found himself sharing stories about his own experiences with injury and healing. The wolf listened to every word, his attention never wavering, occasionally making soft vocalizations that sounded disturbingly like responses. When the injured pup's breathing became more labored, the wolf moved to Michael's side and nudged his hand toward the first aid kit, as if directing him to do more. It was at that moment that Michael realized he wasn't just helping injured animals, he was participating in something unprecedented, a partnership between species that shouldn't have been possible but was happening right before his eyes. The sound of Dr. Chen's truck in his driveway came as both a relief and a source of anxiety. How would she react to what she was about to witness? More importantly, how would the wolf react to another human entering their fragile circle of trust? Dr. Sarah Chen had treated everything from injured eagles to orphaned bear cubs in her 15 years as a wildlife veterinarian, but nothing had prepared her for the scene that greeted her in Michael Harrison's cabin. The grizzled ex-soldier, who rarely spoke more than a few words to anyone, was sitting cross-legged on his workshop floor, carefully administering fluids to a wolf pup, while a massive adult male wolf watched his every movement with what could only be described as parental supervision. "Dear God," she whispered, setting down her veterinary bag with deliberate slowness. The adult wolf's head turned toward her, those striking blue eyes assessing her presence. But instead of the defensive aggression she expected, the animal simply acknowledged her arrival with a slight tilt of its head before returning its attention to the pups. "His name is Ghost," Michael said quietly, not looking up from his task. "At least that's what I've been calling him. He brought me to them about 2 hours ago. The injured one is in rough shape. Infected wound, probably from a trap. The other one is malnourished but stable." Sarah moved slowly, years of training telling her to expect the wolf to bolt or attack at any moment. Instead, Ghost watched her approach with curious intelligence, even shifting slightly to give her better access to the injured pup. When she knelt beside Michael and opened her medical bag, the wolf leaned forward to observe, as if he wanted to learn what she was doing. "This is impossible," she murmured, pulling on latex gloves. "Wild wolves don't behave like this. They don't bring their young to humans, and they certainly don't allow strangers near their offspring." She began her examination of the injured pup, noting the severity of the infection and the animal's weakened state. "This little one needs surgery, and soon. The infection is spreading." As if understanding her words, Ghost moved closer and made a soft, whining sound. The injured pup responded weakly, trying to lift its head toward its father. The sight was heartbreaking, a family in crisis, with the father doing everything in his power to save his child. "We need to discuss options," Sarah said, sitting back on her heels. "The proper protocol would be to transport them to my clinic, treat them there, and then relocate them to a wildlife facility for eventual release. But," she paused, watching Ghost's reaction to their conversation. The wolf's ears were forward, his expression alert, as if he were following their discussion. "But what?" Michael asked, though he could see the conflict in her expression. "But this wolf chose to bring them here, to you. There's something about this situation that's beyond normal wildlife behavior. Look at him, Michael. He's not just tolerating our presence, he's participating in their care." As if to prove her point, Ghost moved to the water bowl and nudged it closer to the healthy pup, then looked back at Sarah expectantly. When the pup didn't drink, Ghost gently nuzzled it until it began lapping at the water. "In 24 hours, if they're stable, I want to take them to my clinic," Sarah said finally. "But I think you're right. There's something special happening here, and I don't want to disrupt it unless absolutely necessary." Over the next 3 days, Michael's cabin became an impromptu wildlife hospital. Sarah set up a temporary surgical station in his workshop, performing the delicate operation to clean and close the infected wound while Ghost watched every step of the procedure. The wolf's behavior continued to astound both humans. He seemed to understand that the surgery was helping his pup, remaining calm throughout the procedure and even positioning himself to hold the patient steady when needed. The recovery period revealed even more extraordinary behavior. Ghost learned to open the cabin door by watching Michael demonstrate the technique once. He would go outside to patrol the property, always returning within an hour to check on his offspring. When the injured pup grew restless during healing, Ghost would lie beside it, providing comfort through physical contact. Most remarkably, he began responding to simple commands: sit, stay, easy, as if he understood that cooperation would help his pups recover faster. "I've never documented anything like this," Sarah said on the 3rd evening, watching Ghost carefully carry a bowl of water to the healthy pup. "His cognitive abilities are off the charts. He's problem-solving, anticipating needs, even learning human gestures and commands. It's like he's adapted to human interaction out of necessity." Michael had been thinking about this too. What if it's not adaptation? What if he's had contact with humans before? He told Sarah about Ghost's scar, the way the wolf seemed familiar with human behavior from the very beginning. Sarah's expression grew thoughtful. "There have been cases of wolves being rescued as pups and then released back into the wild. If Ghost had early exposure to positive human contact, it might explain his willingness to seek help when his own pups were in danger. But the intelligence he's showing goes beyond learned behavior. This is active problem-solving and communication." The breakthrough came on the 4th day, when Sarah discovered troubling evidence about the local wolf population. While researching Ghost's pack territory, she uncovered reports of systematic wolf killings across 3 counties. Entire packs had been found dead, victims of illegal hunting operations that went far beyond legal predator control. "Michael, I think Ghost may be the last adult male in this entire region," she said, spreading maps across his kitchen table. "Look at these reports. 3 separate packs, all eliminated within the past 18 months. The timing coincides with increased anti-wolf sentiment among local ranchers." "You're saying someone's been deliberately targeting them?" "More than that. The pattern suggests organized hunting, possibly baiting operations. Ghost's pack was probably targeted specifically because of their territory, prime hunting grounds that some people want cleared of predators." The implications were staggering. Ghost hadn't just been protecting his pups from individual threats, he'd been trying to preserve the last remnant of his species in the region. His extraordinary intelligence might have been the only thing that kept him alive long enough to seek human help. As word of Michael's pet wolf began to spread through the community, reactions were mixed. Some neighbors were fascinated by the story, stopping by to witness Ghost's remarkable behavior for themselves. Others were less supportive, expressing concern about safety and the precedent of harboring wild predators. "He's not aggressive," Michael found himself explaining repeatedly. "He's protective of the pups, yes, but he's never shown any hostility toward humans. If anything, he seems to understand that we're trying to help." The controversy deepened when local rancher Jim Morrison claimed to have seen Ghost near his livestock. "That wolf's too comfortable around humans," Morrison argued during a heated discussion at the local diner. "It's only a matter of time before someone gets hurt." Wild animals belong in the wild, not in someone's living room. But others in the community had different perspectives. Emma Rodriguez, who ran the local wildlife education center, visited Michael's cabin and was amazed by what she witnessed. "This wolf is demonstrating cognitive abilities that could revolutionize our understanding of wild animal intelligence," she told anyone who would listen. "This isn't just about one family of wolves. This could change how we approach wildlife conservation entirely." Michael found himself caught in the middle of a growing debate, but his focus remained on Ghost and the pups. The injured pup was healing well, showing increasing energy and appetite. The healthy pup had regained weight and strength, often playing with makeshift toys that Michael provided. Throughout it all, Ghost maintained his role as devoted father and cautious guardian, never fully relaxing but clearly trusting Michael and Sarah with his family's welfare. The peaceful routine was shattered on the 6th day when Michael spotted unfamiliar vehicles parked along the access road to his property. Through binoculars, he could see men with rifles moving through the forest, clearly searching for something or someone. "Sarah," he called urgently into his radio. "We've got company and they're armed. I think someone's coming for Ghost." The response crackled back immediately. "Michael, get Ghost and the pups inside and lock the doors. I'm contacting the sheriff. Whatever you do, don't let them see the wolves." But as Michael turned toward his cabin, he realized it might already be too late. Ghost was standing at the edge of the clearing, his hackles raised, staring into the forest with an intensity that suggested he'd detected the approaching threat long before Michael had spotted the vehicles. The confrontation Michael had been dreading arrived with the sound of heavy boots on his front porch and the unmistakable click of rifle safeties being disengaged. Through his window, he could see 5 men arranged in a loose semicircle around his cabin, all armed, all focused on the task they'd come to complete. At their head stood a weathered man in his 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that burned with years of accumulated rage. "Harrison!" the man called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "We know you've got that wolf in there. This ends now." Michael stepped onto his porch, deliberately positioning himself between the armed men and his front door. Behind him, he could hear Ghost's low growl, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the cabin's wooden walls. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" The leader stepped forward, and Michael could see the pain etched into every line of his face. "Name's Bobby Kellerman. That beast you're harboring killed my livestock and terrorized my family. I want it out here now." "Ghost hasn't left my property in 6 days," Michael replied calmly, drawing on his military training to keep his voice steady. "Whatever happened to your livestock, it wasn't him." "Ghost?" Bobby's laugh was bitter and cold. "You gave it a name? Jesus Christ, Harrison, it's a killing machine, not a pet. That thing and its kind have been destroying everything decent folks are trying to build out here." Michael studied the faces of the men arrayed before him. He recognized some of them, local ranchers and hunters who'd been vocal about the wolf problem in recent months. But their expressions weren't just angry, they were afraid. These were men who felt their way of life was under attack, and they'd identified Ghost as the symbol of everything threatening their world. "Why don't you put down those rifles and we can talk about this like civilized people?" Michael suggested. "Civilized?" Bobby's voice cracked with emotion. "You want to talk about civilized? 5 years ago, those goddamn wolves destroyed my family. My boy, Tommy, was 17, had his whole life ahead of him. He was coming home from town when a wolf ran across the road right in front of his ATV. Tommy swerved to avoid it, hit a tree going 40 miles an hour. Now he's in a wheelchair for the rest of his life." The raw pain in Bobby's voice hit Michael like a physical blow. Here was a father whose world had been shattered, looking for someone to blame, something to make the senseless tragedy make sense. "Bobby, I'm sorry about your son. I truly am. But taking revenge on Ghost won't bring Tommy back. It'll make sure no other family goes through what mine did," Bobby shot back. "That wolf in there is the alpha male from the pack that's been terrorizing this whole region. We've tracked it for months, watching it lead attacks on livestock, threatening anyone who gets too close. It's too smart, too dangerous to be allowed to roam free." "You're wrong about Ghost," Michael said quietly. "He's not a killer. He's a father trying to protect his children." "Children?" One of the other men, a rancher named Dale Morris, spat into the dirt. "They're predators, Harrison. Every last one of them. The sooner we clean them out of this valley, the safer everyone will be." Michael felt Ghost's presence behind him before he saw the wolf. The massive animal had somehow opened the cabin door, a skill that still amazed Michael, and now stood at his side, not in an aggressive posture but alert and protective. The sight of the wolf caused several of the armed men to raise their rifles. "Easy," Michael said, holding up his hands. "Nobody move." Ghost stepped forward, and Michael expected the worst. But instead of showing aggression, the wolf did something that left everyone speechless. He sat down, lowered his massive head, and looked directly at Bobby Kellerman with those extraordinary blue eyes. It was the same gesture of supplication he'd shown Michael that first night, a clear signal that he meant no harm. "Son of a bitch," Dale whispered. "It's not even snarling." Bobby stared at Ghost, his rifle wavering in his hands. "Don't let it fool you. They're cunning animals. It knows it's outnumbered." "Look at his eyes, Bobby," Michael said softly. "Really look at them. Does that look like a mindless killer to you?" For a moment, the standoff held. Ghost remained motionless, his gaze fixed on Bobby with something that looked disturbingly like understanding. The silence stretched until it was broken by the sound of approaching vehicles. Dr. Chen's truck followed closely by a sheriff's patrol car. Sheriff Tom Martinez emerged from his vehicle with his hands visible and his weapon holstered, but his presence immediately changed the dynamic of the confrontation. "Gentlemen, I'm going to need everyone to lower their weapons and step back." "Sheriff, that wolf is a public menace," Bobby protested, but he complied with the order, lowering his rifle. "It needs to be put down before it kills someone." Dr. Chen approached carefully, taking in the scene with professional assessment. "Bobby, I've been documenting this wolf's behavior for the past week. He's shown no aggression toward humans. In fact, his cognitive abilities are remarkable. He's been cooperating with medical treatment for his offspring." "Offspring?" Sheriff Martinez looked at Michael with raised eyebrows. "Two pups," Michael explained. "One was seriously injured when Ghost brought them to me. Dr. Chen performed surgery to save its life. Ghost has been helping with their care ever since." Bobby's expression shifted, confusion replacing some of the anger. "You're telling me this wolf asked you for help?" "That's exactly what I'm telling you. And he's been learning, adapting, showing intelligence that goes far beyond normal wolf behavior. This isn't a monster, Bobby. This is a father who loves his children." Dr. Chen stepped forward, her voice taking on the authority of scientific expertise. "Bobby, I've been researching the wolf killings in this region. 3 entire packs have been eliminated in the past 18 months through systematic hunting. Ghost may be the last adult male in a 50-mile radius. If he dies, the wolf population in this area dies with him. Good, Dale Morris muttered, but his heart wasn't in it anymore. Is it? Dr. Chen challenged. Wolves control deer and elk populations. Without them, we'll see massive crop damage, increased vehicle collisions with wildlife, ecosystem collapse. The wolves aren't the problem. The illegal hunting operations are. Bobby's hands trembled as he stared at Ghost, who continued to sit peacefully, making no move to flee or attack. "My boy is never going to walk again," he said, his voice breaking. "Someone has to pay for that." "Someone does," Sheriff Martinez said quietly. "But maybe it's time to ask if you've been making the right someone pay." The weight of that statement hung in the air as Ghost slowly stood and moved to Michael's side, then did something that stunned everyone present. He walked directly to Bobby Kellerman, sat down at the man's feet, and gently placed one massive paw on Bobby's boot, not aggressively but as if offering comfort to another grieving soul. Bobby Kellerman stared down at the massive gray paw resting on his boot, and something inside him finally shattered. The rifle slipped from his trembling hands, clattering to the wooden porch as 5 years of carefully constructed rage crumbled in an instant. "Get away from me," he whispered, but there was no conviction in his words. Ghost remained perfectly still, those blue eyes gazing up at him with what looked impossibly like compassion. "Bobby," Sheriff Martinez said softly, stepping closer, "maybe it's time you told us what really happened that night." The question hit Bobby like a physical blow. His face contorted with anguish as he fought against words that had been buried for half a decade. "You don't understand," he gasped, tears streaming down his weathered cheeks. "It should have been the wolves. It was supposed to be their fault." Michael felt his heart sink as he recognized the look of a man confronting a truth he'd spent years avoiding. He'd seen it in his own mirror too many times, the expression of someone who'd built their entire existence around a lie they needed to believe. "Tommy wasn't swerving to avoid a wolf, was he?" Dr. Chen asked gently. Bobby's legs seemed to give out, and he sank onto the porch steps, Ghost moving aside but remaining close. He was, God forgive me, he was showing off, racing that damn ATV I bought him for his birthday. His mother told me not to, said he was too young, too reckless. But I wanted him to have what I never had as a kid. The confession poured out of him like blood from a wound that had festered too long. He was coming home from a party, probably been drinking, though we never talked about that part. Took that turn by Miller's Creek going way too fast, lost control. There were skid marks for 50 feet before he hit that tree. Dale Morris stepped back, his face pale. "Bobby, you told everyone." "I told everyone what I needed to believe," Bobby screamed, his voice echoing off the surrounding mountains. "My wife left me because she blamed me for buying him that ATV. Tommy blamed himself because he was the one driving. I needed it to be someone else's fault, something else's fault. When I found wolf tracks near the accident site the next morning, it seemed like Providence." Sheriff Martinez exchanged a look with Dr. Chen. "Bobby, there's something else you need to know. We've been investigating the illegal hunting operations in this region. Your name has come up in connection with the systematic elimination of 3 wolf packs." Bobby's face went ashen. "We were protecting people, protecting families from going through what mine did. You were murdering innocent animals because you couldn't face the truth about your son's accident," Michael said, his voice heavy with sadness rather than accusation. "How many wolves died because you needed someone to blame?" The number came out as a whisper. 37. The silence that followed was deafening. Even Ghost seemed to sense the weight of that admission, pressing closer to Bobby as if offering comfort to a fellow creature in pain. 37 wolves, Dr. Chen repeated, her voice thick with grief. Entire bloodlines wiped out, family units destroyed. Ghost's pack, his mate, his previous offspring, all killed because of a lie you told yourself. Bobby looked up at Ghost, and for the first time in years he saw not a monster, but a living being who had suffered loss just as devastating as his own. "Oh God," he breathed. "What have I done?" "The same thing I did when I lost my squad in Afghanistan," Michael said quietly, sitting down beside Bobby on the steps. "You survived something terrible and spent years punishing yourself and everyone around you for it. The difference is, I only hurt myself. You've been hurting innocent creatures who never did anything wrong." Ghost, with that uncanny intelligence that continued to astound everyone, seemed to understand the moment. He moved closer to Bobby and gently placed his massive head on the broken man's knee, not in submission, but in forgiveness. "He knows," Bobby whispered, looking down at Ghost with wonder. "Somehow he knows what I did to his family, and he's forgiving me." "Animals don't hold grudges the way humans do," Dr. Chen said softly. "They respond to the present moment, to immediate intentions. Ghost can sense that you're in pain, just like he was when he brought his pups to Michael." The sound of another vehicle approaching broke the spell. A modified pickup truck with hand controls pulled into the clearing, and a young man in a wheelchair emerged using a hydraulic lift. Tommy Kellerman, now 22, had his father's strong jaw, but his eyes held a maturity that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "Dad," Tommy called out, maneuvering his wheelchair across the uneven ground with practiced ease. "I heard what was happening up here. We need to talk." Bobby's face went white as he saw his son approaching, Ghost still resting peacefully beside him on the porch steps. Tommy Kellerman's wheelchair came to a stop, just feet from where his father sat, with Ghost's massive head still resting on his knee. The young man's eyes took in the scene, the discarded rifle, his father's tear-streaked face, the enormous wolf showing no fear of the humans surrounding him, and his expression shifted from concern to something approaching relief. "5 years, Dad," Tommy said, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of accumulated pain. "5 years. I've been trying to tell you the truth, and you wouldn't listen." Bobby couldn't meet his son's eyes. "Tommy, No." Tommy's voice cut through his father's attempt at explanation. "You're going to listen now. All of you." He looked around at the assembled group, then directly at Sheriff Martinez. "My father didn't make up the story about wolves causing my accident. I did." The admission hit like a thunderclap. Dr. Chen stepped forward, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What do you mean?" Tommy took a deep breath, his hands gripping the wheels of his chair. "When I woke up in the hospital, I saw what my stupidity had done to my family. My mom was crying constantly, blaming herself for not stopping Dad from buying me the ATV. Dad was consumed with guilt, barely eating, barely sleeping. I was 17 years old, high on painkillers, and I thought I could fix everything by giving them someone else to blame." Bobby's head snapped up, staring at his son in shock. "You told me you saw a wolf." "I lied." Tommy's voice cracked, but he pressed on. "I made up the story about the wolf running across the road because I thought it would help you and Mom stop tearing yourselves apart. I figured it was just a white lie, that it wouldn't hurt anyone. I never imagined you'd—" He gestured helplessly at Ghost, who was now sitting upright, watching the conversation with those impossibly intelligent blue eyes. "You never imagined I'd spend 5 years hunting down innocent animals," Bobby finished, his voice hollow. "I tried to tell you the truth so many times," Tommy continued, tears flowing freely now. "But every time I started to explain, you'd get that look in your eyes, like the hatred for wolves was the only thing keeping you together. I was afraid that if I took that away from you, you'd fall apart completely." Michael found himself thinking of his own years of self-imposed exile, the way he'd used his guilt over his fallen squad members as both punishment and purpose. "Sometimes the lie becomes easier to live with than the truth," he said quietly. Sheriff Martinez pulled out a notebook, his expression grim. "Tommy, I need you to understand the implications of what you're telling us. Your father organized a systematic hunting operation that eliminated 3 wolf packs in this region. 37 animals died based on the story you created." Tommy's face went pale, but he nodded. "I know. I've known for months. I hired a private investigator to document what Dad was doing, hoping I could find a way to stop him without destroying what was left of our relationship." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder. "I have photographs, witness statements, evidence of the illegal hunting operations. I was planning to turn it all over to the authorities after I figured out how to tell Dad the truth." Ghost stood and moved closer to Tommy's wheelchair, sniffing cautiously at the young man's outstretched hand. Tommy held perfectly still as the wolf examined him, and when Ghost gently licked his fingers, Tommy broke down completely. "I'm so sorry," he whispered to Ghost, as if the wolf could understand his words. "I'm so sorry for what my lie cost your family." Dr. Chen knelt beside the wheelchair, her voice gentle but urgent. "Tommy, there's something you need to know about Ghost. He's not just any wolf. He's likely the last adult male in this entire region. The hunting operation your father organized didn't just kill individual animals. It may have eliminated the wolf population entirely. Except for Ghost and his pups," Michael added, looking at the magnificent animal who had somehow survived the systematic slaughter of his kind. Bobby finally found his voice, staring at his son with a mixture of anguish and bewilderment. "Why now? Why are you telling us this now?" Tommy reached out and touched Ghost's scarred muzzle, the wolf allowing the contact with remarkable trust. "Because of him. When I heard about the wolf who brought his injured pups to a human for help, who was showing intelligence and cooperation beyond anything ever documented, I realized that these aren't the monsters I helped you paint them as. They're families, just like ours. They love their children, they grieve their losses, they do whatever it takes to protect the ones they care about." He looked directly at his father, his voice gaining strength. "Ghost lost his mate, his pack, probably multiple litters of pups, because of the lie I told to protect our family. But instead of seeking revenge, instead of attacking the humans who destroyed his world, he came here asking for help to save his children. He's showing more honor and forgiveness than either of us managed in 5 years." Sheriff Martinez closed his notebook, the weight of the situation clearly affecting him. "This changes everything legally. Bobby, you'll still face charges for the illegal hunting, but Tommy's testimony about the origin of the wolf story will be taken into consideration." "I don't care about the legal consequences," Bobby said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at Ghost, who was now lying peacefully beside Tommy's wheelchair. How do I even begin to make amends for what I've done?" Dr. Chen stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "You start by helping us ensure that Ghost and his pups survive to rebuild what you destroyed. The wolf population in this region is hanging by a thread. But if we can protect Ghost and successfully reintroduce his offspring to the wild, there's still hope." Ghost raised his head at the sound of soft whimpering from inside the cabin. The healthy pup had awakened and was calling for his father. Without hesitation, Ghost stood and padded toward the cabin door, pausing only to look back at the assembled humans with an expression that seemed to say, "My children need me." "Just like any father would," Tommy said softly, watching the wolf disappear inside to comfort his offspring. 6 months later, Michael Harrison stood on his porch in the golden light of a Montana sunrise, watching a sight that still filled him with wonder. Ghost emerged from the forest at the edge of the property, his coat gleaming silver in the morning sun, followed by his two now healthy offspring. The injured pup had grown into a strong young male with his father's intelligent eyes, while his sibling had developed into a graceful female with her mother's smaller build but Ghost's distinctive blue gaze. The transformation in all their lives had been remarkable. Michael's cabin had become an unofficial wildlife research station, with Dr. Chen establishing a permanent observation post in a small trailer she'd placed at the far end of his property. The work they were doing together, documenting Ghost's unprecedented intelligence and social adaptations, was attracting attention from wildlife biologists across North America. "He's teaching them, Doctor," Chen said, joining Michael on the porch with 2 steaming cups of coffee. "Look at how he demonstrates the proper approach to the cabin. He's passing on his learned behaviors about human interaction." Indeed, Ghost was showing his offspring how to move calmly around the property, how to signal their intentions to the humans, even how to wait patiently for food rather than approaching aggressively. The young wolves had learned to respond to basic commands and showed none of the typical wariness that wild wolves exhibited around people. "The journal article is going to revolutionize wolf research," Dr. Chen continued. "Ghost's cognitive abilities, his capacity for learning and teaching complex social behaviors, it's changing everything we thought we knew about wild canine intelligence." Michael smiled, remembering his own initial skepticism. "Sometimes I think he understands more than we give him credit for." Yesterday, when Tommy was here for his visit, Ghost seemed to sense that he was having a rough day, brought him a stick to throw, just like a dog would. The weekly visits from Tommy Kellerman had become a cornerstone of everyone's healing process. The young man had initially struggled with guilt over his role in the tragedy, but his growing relationship with Ghost had helped him find a path toward forgiveness, both for himself and his father. Bobby Kellerman's transformation had been perhaps the most dramatic of all. After serving 6 months in county jail and paying substantial fines for illegal hunting, he had thrown himself into habitat restoration work with an intensity that bordered on obsession. He spent his days replanting native vegetation, removing illegal traps, and working with Dr. Chen to identify potential sites for wolf reintroduction. "Dad's out at the creek restoration site again," Tommy had reported during his last visit. "He's been there since dawn, clearing invasive species. I think he's trying to plant enough trees to replace every wolf he killed." The healing process hadn't been easy for any of them. Michael still struggled with nightmares from his military service, but caring for Ghost and his pups had given him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt since Afghanistan. The daily routine of feeding, monitoring, and simply spending time with the wolves had become a form of therapy more effective than anything he'd tried before. Dr. Chen appeared on the porch, interrupting his thoughts. "Michael, we need to discuss the next phase. Ghost's pups are reaching maturity, and they're showing signs of wanting to explore beyond the property. It might be time to consider a gradual release program." The words Michael had been dreading finally spoken aloud. He'd known this day would come. Ghost and his family weren't pets, despite their remarkable adaptation to human contact. They were wild animals who deserved the chance to live as nature intended. "I know," he said quietly. "I've seen how restless they're getting. The young male especially. He's been testing the boundaries, ranging farther into the forest each day." As if summoned by their conversation, Ghost approached the porch and sat in his customary spot beside Michael's chair. The wolf had never lost his wild dignity, but over the months he'd developed an almost supernatural ability to read human emotions and respond appropriately. "The plan would be gradual," Dr. Chen explained. "We'd start by expanding their territory, removing the invisible barriers that keep them close to the cabin. Ghost can choose how much independence to give them and how much to maintain contact with us." Michael reached down to scratch behind Ghost's ears, marveling at how natural the gesture had become. What about the bigger picture? Are there other wolves in the region now? That's the most encouraging news, Dr. Chen said, her eyes lighting up. We've documented 2 young females that migrated in from Canada, attracted by Ghost's territorial markings. If we can successfully reintroduce his offspring to the wild population, we could have a viable breeding group within 2 years. The sound of vehicles approaching drew their attention to the access road. Sheriff Martinez's patrol car was followed by a familiar modified pickup truck. Tommy Kellerman had arrived for his weekly visit, but today he wasn't alone. Bobby climbed stiffly from the passenger seat, his clothes muddy from his morning work at the creek. The relationship between father and son remained complicated, marked by love and forgiveness, but also by the permanent changes that tragedy had wrought on their family. Bobby's wife had never returned, unable to forgive either the original deception or the years of violence that followed. But Bobby and Tommy were slowly rebuilding their connection, using their shared commitment to Ghost's welfare as a bridge over the chasm that had divided them. "How are our boys doing today?" Tommy called out as he maneuvered his wheelchair across the uneven ground. Ghost's ears perked up at the sound of his voice, and both pups bounded over to greet their regular visitor. Bobby approached more slowly, still carrying visible guilt in his posture despite the progress he'd made. Ghost watched him with those remarkable blue eyes, showing neither fear nor resentment, only acceptance of Bobby's presence as part of the pack's extended family. "Dr. Chen was just telling me it might be time to start the release program," Michael said as the group gathered on the porch. Bobby's face tightened with concern. "Are they ready? Will they be safe out there?" "They're wild animals, Bobby," Tommy said gently. "They were never meant to live in someone's cabin forever, no matter how much we love them." "I know," Bobby replied, his voice heavy with emotion. "It's just, after everything I took from them, I want to make sure they have every chance to rebuild what I destroyed." Ghost stood and moved to Bobby's side, pressing his massive head against the man's leg in the gesture of comfort that had become familiar over the months. It was a moment that never failed to amaze Michael, this wild predator offering solace to the very human who had caused his species so much suffering. "He forgave you long ago," Dr. Chen observed. "Maybe it's time you forgave yourself." As the sun climbed higher over the Montana mountains, the unlikely family, human and wolf, broken and healing, wild and domesticated, sat together in comfortable silence. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, difficult decisions about freedom and safety, love and letting go. But for now, in this moment of peace, they were simply a pack taking care of each other, just as Ghost had taught them all. Sometimes life's greatest gifts come disguised as our deepest fears. When Michael Harrison opened his door to that desperate wolf, he thought he was saving Ghost's family. But it was Ghost who saved him from a lifetime of isolation and guilt. In our golden years, we often find ourselves carrying burdens we've held for decades, regrets about choices we made, chances we missed, or hurts we couldn't heal. Bobby Kellerman spent 5 years destroying innocent lives because he couldn't face the truth about his son's accident. Tommy carried the weight of a lie that spiraled beyond his control. Yet through Ghost's extraordinary capacity for forgiveness and love, all 3 men found their way back to connection, purpose, and peace. This story reminds us that it's never too late to choose healing over hatred, truth over comfortable lies, and love over fear. Whether you're 55 or 85, whether you're wrestling with loss, guilt, or loneliness, there's still time to open your door to unexpected grace. Sometimes salvation comes on 4 legs with blue eyes and a wounded heart that somehow still believes in the goodness of others. What burden have you been carrying that might be ready to set down? Have you ever found healing in an unexpected place or relationship? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.